Hello, welcome to the video. First of all, please ignore the mess. It's just the sign of being and also living with a creative genius. If you're planning on watching this instead of just skipping to the reveal, like I would, nice. Secondly, if you're actually some reason watching the whole video instead of just using it to fall asleep or to have as background noise whilst you're doing the dishes, like I would, again, nice. Thanks very much for paying attention. I just want to say, because of time constraints, because of when this video has to be uploaded, and all of the stuff that I've got going on in the week, I'm not saying the video is messy. I'm not saying it's not polished. I would just prefer it to be a little more polished. I wish I had more time. But thank you so much for all the support on this series. It's been really fun. I'm super, super happy with how this model has turned out. So whether you're going to watch the whole thing or skip to the end, enjoy the video. Thank you so much for the support. I'll see you at the end. Cast your mind back to 2 weeks ago. We just finished kit bashing Ezekiel and we got him sprayed up in Xandri dust. And here he is. The first thing that I did was take some Black Legion and just block in all of the colors that were going to be basically armor, anything dark, all of my blues, all my greens, all my reds. I find that Black Legion just covers much more easily than Abaddon Black does. It goes on like a dream, and it might not be quite as opaque, but it's absolutely fine if we're going to apply something like Abyss Blue. So this is Abyss Blue from 2 thin coats, and I'm just getting all of my armor plating done in Abyss Blue. And this is my first time using 2 thin coats, non-metallic paints. Really nice experience. I rated it. It was nice. So here he is after blocking in all of the blue armor plating. Next up, Caliban Green. I think in this clip, I literally only did one shoulder pad because I didn't realize the other shoulder pad is also green. And then, of course, the sort of the inside of the robes at the front, I also went back and did that in Caliban Green a little bit later on. Time for Mephiston Red. For this, it's purity seals, all of the pipes that are all over his body. I think there's the binding on the Book of Salvation on his left hip. A few other details as well. But just getting that blocked in nicely. Next, it was time for Sir Coat Silver. I was just getting the chains, the keys, the blade of the sword itself, the pole of the back banner, and a couple of other small details. And this is how he came out. Moving on to Iriel Yellow. I don't, unfortunately, have a more opaque or stronger yellow. So this took me a lot of time. We're going to skip an awful lot of how much time it took. This is Iriel Yellow on the back banner. Just getting that nice classic kind of look. To build that up, I used Imperial Fist Contrast. It just adds a lot of vibrancy. I think it's a really nice thing to put on there as well. Next was Rhinox Hide. This was going to be used for all the leather. So the book on his hip, the book on his knee, and of course the holster for his pistol. All done in Rhinox to get that nice leather base down. Next it was going to be Battle Axe Brass. This is primarily for the hilt of the sword. But I also chose to do a couple of other details. So the sort of joins on the back banner just to give it a little bit of variety so it's not all silver. We've got Mechanicus Standard Grey. So this, I wanted to do everything that I was going to paint white. I wanted to base in grey first just to make it a little bit easier to paint the white on. And here we go. So we've got the Dark Angel symbol, we've got all of the papers on the purity seals, and we've got the book at the top of his back banner. Moving on to Leviathan Blue, I used this quite watered down to just basically glaze some shading onto the armor plating. So anything that was kind of underneath where there would be shadow, got a nice little glaze, and it's quite a subtle effect, but you can just about see it. It helps just darken certain areas and make it look a little bit more realistic. Next, I took Abyss Blue and Witching Hour Blue. I mixed the two and created a thin glaze and did the exact same thing, but just on the raised edges. So anywhere that the light was going to be hitting, I just lightened it up just a little bit, not too much. Now we move on to Xandri Dust. You'll notice that some magic Rakar flesh has appeared all over the robes. I'm not entirely sure what happened to the video, but yeah, we all the raised edges of the robes, we did Rakar flesh, and then I just went over with Xandri Dust again to make sure that those recesses were nice and dark. I think there is also a mixture of Rakar flesh and Pallid Witch flesh on the even more raised areas, and then we're just taking Pallid Witch flesh to do the very, very highlights on those robes. Like I say, I don't know what happened to the footage, but there we are. That's the robes process. If you want to see how to paint the robes, I stole the recipe from the painting coach. If you watch the painting coach's Asmodee video, which is linked in the top corner, that's where the robe recipe came from. So moving back to where we are now, I've just used some black Tamiya panel liner to get all the recesses. I find it's a really nice way to do that for Space Marine armor plating. And now I'm just using Nuln Oil to get all the other areas, so the pipes, the green, all of the metals, just get some Nuln Oil on there. We've now, catch you up to speed, Caliban Green is kind of being layered up on all of the green areas, and then a mix of Caliban Green and Warpstone. Just basically slowly raising that color to something nice and bright. Using just Warpstone Glow, I'm doing some thin highlights on that pauldron just to kind of make it pop, and then doing the exact same thing with Moot Green. I'm using the same colors to build up the robes at the front and just make them look a little bit more vibrant. So once that's finished, I took some Tooth & Coat's green glaze and went all over the green areas with that. This just helps the darker bits pop a little bit more. And after that, it was time to return to Abyss Blue. So because of the Tamiya panel liner, a couple of bits had splashed onto armor plating where they weren't supposed to be. So just using Abyss Blue, I kind of neatened up all the armor, left the recesses nice and dark, tried to avoid the areas where I'd done my highlights and shadows, but just made sure that it was nice and level. Taking just Witching Hour Blue, it's time to do some armor highlights. So I'm just going around, doing all my edge highlights as neatly as possible. And not making them the thinnest they can be, just so that the second highlight has a bit of space to go. So the second highlight, Leviathan Blue from Tooth & Coats. This is the one where I really was trying to be as thin as possible, as neat as possible, and just catch the very edges of the armor plating as I went around. At this stage, the blue armor starts to look quite of classic colors, old Space Marines, and I really enjoy how it looks. However, we are going to be hitting the entire thing with a thinned glaze of Talissar Blue contrast paint. This paint is absolutely stunning. It's so vibrant, and it's, for me, what really pulls this model together and makes the armor kind of stand out. It's such a strong color. You really have to thin it down if you're going to use it as a glaze like this. I could have thinned it a little bit more maybe, but I'm happy with how it came out in the end. Next, we're getting back to Surcoat Silver, and I'm using my dry palette here. I want a brushed steel kind of effect on the sword, so I'm just using my smallest dry brush, and I'm going over the sword with that silver. We've washed it with Nuln Oil. This kind of just brings the edges back and adds some kind of scratchy brushed effects on there. Moving back to Leviathan Blue, I was just getting a couple of the most raised edge highlights to just push the highlight back in, because obviously the Talissar Blue has pushed those highlights down a little bit. This just raises them back up. Onto Doombull Brown. This is where I'm going to start to really create the leather effect that I want. I've thinned it a little bit, and I'm just kind of almost stippling this on. You can go quite deep into the Rhinox hide. As long as you've thinned the paint just a little bit, it creates just a really nice kind of leathery effect. Then we've got Tusgo Fur. This is also for the leather. This is more of a kind of normal edge highlight. I find if you do both as edge highlights, you don't really get that effect. If you do the kind of stippling on motion with Doombull Brown, and maybe just a little bit with this one, with the Tusgo Fur, it just makes that kind of more natural looking sort of fract, dark leather effect. Next, just a little bit of Cadian Flesh Tone, just being very, very careful to hit his face with this and not paint over all of the armor that I've done and the eye lens that we've painted silver. But if we do, it's fine. We can always patch the edges back up. Onto Mithril Blade now. This is what I'm going to use to highlight all of my metal areas. This will pop really nicely against the surcoats with Nuln over the top. It's such a big contrast. It really helps the metal stand out. I'm going to put this all over the silvers that I've done and take especially a good amount of time to make sure that the edges of the sword are nice. We've also put a couple of scratches on that sword. Now that the Cadian Flesh Tone is dry, we got a little bit of Reikland Flesh Shade. We're just going to pop that in there just to get some recesses, just to get a little bit of texture on his face. Next, we're back on Mephiston Red. I'm using this now just on the raised parts of the Force Sword. Most of the Force weapons that they have now tend to have this pattern be yellow, but I want that classic look. We're going to build that up with some Troll Slayer Orange, just along the center of the blade. So we start to get a nice highlight. And then to finish that off, we've got some Flash Gitz Yellow. We're just going to do this as thinly as possible along the center of the pattern. And that'll just finish off the effect. Next, we've got Evil Sun Scarlet. I am using this to highlight all of the reds that are already on there. So we've done Mephiston Red, and then that was hit with some Nuln. We're just using this now to get some nice highlights on and just make it pop again. And one of these days I'll figure out how to point a camera at a model properly. Onto Administratum Grey. I've got the air version of this. It's really nice to use because it's already thinned. We're going over all of the Mechanica standard grey bits that we've done, everything that we want to build up white. I am using this to kind of be the mid layer of that. I find when painting white, building up from some pale greys is a really nice way to make the white pop when you do eventually put that highlight on. Next, we have some Corax white. I'm just using this at the moment to put in the pages of the books. And also to colour in the purity seals. Like I said, this has gone on much more easily because we started with Mechanica Standard instead of the Black Legion. I'm also just getting that spiky effect at the bottom of the robe in the white as well. We're going back to Battle Axe Brass. I'm just using this on the crossbar of the sword and all of the details that we've already done in brass just to bring up the edges back from having been null-noiled. Next, we've got Kislev flesh. And we're just going to try and get some very tiny highlights on Ezekiel's face with this. Onto White Star. We're using this on everything that I have done so far in Corax White to just really make those details pop a little bit more. Gal Vorbak red now, and this is just going to be used on the fold of the robe. We've already used some green down there, so a nice contrasting colour that stands out against the bone robe and also distinguishes itself from the green in the middle. It's a very nice colour to start building some pink from. Speaking of, we've got Screamer Pink. So now that the Gal Vorbak is dry, I'm just using this to add some more sort of light volumes to that little bit of robe. Next, we have a mixture of Bony Matter Army Painter paint and Army Paint Medium. This is another tip that's come from the painting coach, and I'm just using that to make all of the horn skulls a nice bony colour. Moving on to Apothecary White, we've used that for our papers on the purity seals, and now onto Pink Horror, we're just using this as our final highlight on that little bit of folded robe. Sigvald Burgundy, thinned down slightly, makes a nice kind of wash/glaze that brings the whole thing together. Then moving on to Canoptek Alloy, this is a great highlight colour for the Battle Axe Brass, so I'm just going around all of the cross guard on the sword with that, and also the skull that is the pommel of the sword. Moving on to Dragon's Gold, we're just going to do all the clasps on the books in this colour. It's just a nice little detail that makes the Book of Salvation look a bit more rich, look a bit more ornamental. And then going back to Warpstone Glow, I'm using this to highlight the ropes around Ezekiel's belt, which we'd already painted Caliban green. We're going to move on to Moot again, just to make those ropes stand out a little bit more. And whilst we're at it, we might as well throw just a tiny splash of green glaze on there, just to make those colours pop. We're moving on to some Wild Rider Red. I'm just using this as a very thin highlight along all the pipes, and also a highlight on the Purity Seal wax, and the red details on the bolt pistol holster. Going back to Screamer Pink, just because we missed the handle of this sword up at the top. And Dragon's Gold is what we used for the hilt and the pommel of that little sword in the book. Moving on to Screaming Skull, I'm just using this to build up some nice details on the skulls, the horn skulls on the pauldron and the ones on his van braces. Just build up kind of a natural bone looking color. Going back to Aerial Yellow. You thought we were finished? You thought absolutely wrong. The yellow was not strong enough on the back banner, so I went back to a couple more layers of Aerial Yellow and just got that thing as strong as possible. But what really makes this look like the retro scheme is the Anden Yellow thinned down just a little bit. Absolutely covering that thing, we get some really nice yellow highlights and that sort of strong yellowy orange in the recesses. Back to Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm blocking in the stripe across the back banner just to make it nice and bright and punchy. And then back to Black Legion, we're just going to make sure that that line is solid and that all of the black bits are nice and dark before we start doing any more work on the back banner. I'm using Wild Rider Red here to just highlight the red. And then once that's done, I'm going to use Eshin Grey to highlight all of the black areas of the back banner. This just helps add a little bit of texture and make it look a bit more believable. Next, I'm taking a pencil. I've got a reference image on my computer in front of me, and I'm just trying to sketch in roughly what the back banner is going to look like so that I'm not just going off my imagination and I get the proportions as close as possible. I am not someone who does a lot of freehand. This is probably the first time I've done anything more than just a symbol on a shoulder pad. So now I'm just putting in some Stegodon scale green to get the kind of binding of the book that is going to be on the back banner sort of blocked in. Taking some Corax White, I'm going to now try and add the pages into the stencil that I've drawn for myself with the pencil. That's looking all right so far. Moving on to some Rakkar flesh, I'm going to put in the little scripture that goes across the bottom that has Ezekiel's name on it. And I'm just trying to be as accurate as possible compared to the original back banner. Do a second layer of that just to make it nice and strong. And a second layer of Stegodon scale green over the book just to make sure that that is nice and strong. I've mixed some white into the Stegodon scale green just to add some kind of highlights to the book, give it some texture, make it stand out more from the Black Legion background. And then I'm just going over the pages again in Corax White to build that white up and make it nice and strong. Back to Black Legion because it is just fantastic to apply and do some little freehand bits with. I'm using this to kind of draw the edges of the pages onto the book. And now I'm sketching out where the flame is going to go. So using a little bit of Druchii Violet, I'm just splashing that over the pages. Because if you look at the original, there is a kind of purple tint to those pages. And now back in with some white, just to make sure that it isn't entirely purple. And there's just a kind of splash of purple rather than all of the pages being Druchii Violet. Next, we've got some Pallid Witch flesh. And I'm just using this to add some more detail and some highlights to the little scripture at the bottom. Now, using this pen, this might be cheating. I don't really care because it is just a fantastic way of writing. This has helped me put in some little fake words on the book and also put Ezekiel's name over that little scripture at the bottom of the page. I didn't get the spacing perfect, but it's good enough. It's honestly good enough for my first major freehand. We've moved on to Mephiston Red, I believe, blocking in where the fire is going to be. So following the guidelines from earlier and then kind of just copying the pattern from my reference image, I'm adding that fire trailing off to that top right corner. I'm just going to start building up highlights to make it bright. So back to Troll Slayer Orange. We're just going to keep building those highlights up until we reach a nice hot looking flame. Flash gets yellow just to do those edges of the fire. And I think I may have done a little bit too much yellow. So at some point I do come back in with a little bit more red and orange to kind of dull it back down. Using the pen, I'm just tracing the edges. This makes it really stand out from the background and really sells the effect. So now I'm using Black Legion to block in where the sword is going to be stabbing through the book. I'm going to take a little bit of Abyss Blue and we're going to sketch in that sword hilt and handle. And then building up through the same colors that we used on the armor. We've got Witching Hour Blue, just to add more detail, add more brightness, make it stand out from the background. And then finally Leviathan Blue, just to do the exact same thing. Going back to Administratum Grey, and I'm just going to use this to sketch in the actual sword blade. And we're going to use the pen to once again outline what we've painted in. It's just a great way to break up the colors from the background and make it a little bit easier to kind of see. Whilst we've got the pen out, we're also going to add some little words and some little scribblies to the papers on the purity seals. I'm just using some Sigvald Burgundy. I'll just put a little letter on the top of that book as well, just to add some visual interest and some more color. I'm just doing some little touch-ups all over what we've already done and adding some Nuln Oil to the blade of the sword. Adding white to the Leviathan Blue just to get some extra pop on that sword hilt. This is a very long process, I gotta say. Freehanding is very hard. I did not take as much time to film this nicely because time constrictions and stress and doing something new. But yeah, I'm happy with how it came out. We've got some Administratum Grey just to, again, put the highlights back on the sword and push the shading out the way a little bit. And I made sure that we got some sort of yellow and red reflections on the sword as well, to sort of have it reflecting the fire just a little bit. And I'm just constantly touching up those highlights. At no point do I want to lose the highlights. This was my first attempt at the little skull at the top. I was not happy with it. So once we kind of got that finished, we did have a second go, which I think came out far better. Whilst I'm here, I'm just putting some Corax white on that little banner thing across the bottom of the book, and also the little one across the pauldron. Back to Flash Gits. I'm just using this to highlight the banner. Just get all of the edges done nicely. And also build up some texture on the actual back of the banner. And he's near enough done. So using Mortarian Grime, this is how I coloured in the little banner things on the pauldron and underneath the book at the very top. And this, I think, is our second go at the skull. I did the skull considerably bigger the second time round so that I had more area to kind of work with. And I think I'm just touching up more things with the pen, adding those outlines back in. It's now time to use Pallid Witch Flesh to touch up all the areas where I've spilled some Talisar blue onto the robes and just fix all my mistakes. Adding a little bit of glistening gold from two thin coats to highlight all of the dragon's gold areas that we did earlier. And back to some nice grey to just highlight that back banner again. Once again, touching everything up with the pen. And if you know the banner well, you might have noticed that I have missed a couple of bits. The sword is meant to go all the way through the butt and to the bottom of the banner. This is something that I do go back and do off camera. There's a number of things that I missed during the filming of this and only saw when I was kind of getting ready to video the end result. But don't worry, we touched everything up as well as we possibly could. And yeah, you'll see it very soon. So just highlighting all the metals now, making sure everything looks great. Bit of Canoptech alloy that we missed earlier on all the brass sections. And now I'm taking some White Star, and there's the kind of raised edge of the freehand area of the banner. I'm just blocking that in White Star because it separates the black from the yellow very nicely. I think on the original model, it is just black. I wanted something to really break up the line between the two colors. And here is the final result. So after varnishing him with a mixture of matte and satin and then hitting all of the metal areas with a gloss varnish, this is how our boy looks. And honestly, I'm so happy with him. There's things that went wrong. I had to redo a bunch of his face because some OSL attempts went horribly wrong, but we move, it's fine. I think he still looks good after all the touch-ups that I had to do off camera. I'm genuinely so thrilled with this model. Ezekiel was one of my favorite characters from the Dark Angels as a kid. He still is one of my favorite now, and I'm super happy to have done him justice. Do I think I'm going to win or place anything at the competition? Realistically, no. I've seen some of the competition in person. It's really good. A lot of great entries have been made. But I'm proud. I think we're in with maybe a chance of a third place. We'll just have to see how much is submitted between now and the actual judging day. But thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. Next week, if you're watching this on the day it goes out, next week, the competition will have happened. And on Monday, I will be doing thoughts and feelings and all of that sort of stuff. So make sure you tune in for that. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this ridiculously long video. I never planned for it to go on this long, but editing. I have time constraints. I need to get this bit done. Take care and I'll see you next time.